Hey folks, Steve here with a monitor side chat video for July 2021. This video is coming a little bit later than I had originally intended. I would have really have liked to have done this a few days ago, but um, life just gets in the way a little bit. Um, yeah, I think this is now going to be the third month in a row consecutively that I've done one of these videos. And like the others, this is a good video that is maybe better for the audio more than just video content. So if you're planning on doing some yard work this summer and want to kind of put this on in the background one way or the other, whether it's on your phone or any other solution you might have, this video probably works well for that. It's probably going to be fairly long. I don't want it to be the longest video in the world, but you know how I talk. So, yeah, I've got a number of topics that I want to talk through today that I thought would be fun. And I'll say, I think I mentioned this last time. At some point in the future, a lot of these things I feel work a lot better maybe for a stream. And I'm still not at the point where I think I could handle a stream and in terms of timing and planning ahead and making all of that work. There's certainly an element of these videos where I would like engagement or at least some conversations out of it, not just me speaking into the ether. So there's going to be some moments here as we go through the video that I am going to ask for your guys' thoughts or what you guys are thinking or what you've encountered, just to make this more interactive. I don't really see this as just me speaking one way. It's just an opportunity to sit down and spend some time talking about the hobby in a very loose and low-key format. Um, obviously, it being the later part of the month, publishers have published their updates for stuff that's coming, and the GMT newsletter has come out, which is always one worth looking at, right? And I think a lot of content creators tend to talk through the monthly updates and the newsletters and kind of talk a little bit about what's going on through here. This month, and looking at the monthly update from GMT, there wasn't a whole lot in here that really blew me away or really had me super psyched. It's sort of one of those things. I think maybe it's like a first world problem kind of thing where, if you have the times where publishers are putting out stuff, a lot of stuff that you really, really like, and there's just a lot of content to, lots of games to buy or whatever, like, you have a finite amount of time. So it's a good problem to have. A lot of games you really like or really interested in are coming out. You can't play them all. And for me, it's okay to have the opposite where, yeah, maybe not as much stuff that I'm like immediately latched onto has been announced or is coming out, but that gives me more time to play stuff like Pax Romana, which I'm doing a series for now. A little bit more time to just play the stuff that I already own and catch up on stuff I want to look into. And going through here, Gene talks about some of the supply chain and shipping slowdowns, that they've got a lot of stuff in the queue to come out. And they talk about some of the P500 updates. So the new stuff, Downfall in the British Way, I'll talk about. The rest of this stuff isn't as immediately interesting to me. The Almoravid map looks kind of interesting. I have the first Levian campaign game, Nevsky, and I've yet to play it. And I felt really bad about that because I was really on the cusp of doing so, and I got sidetracked by other stuff as it happened. So it's like I don't know that I'm gonna get Almoravid, at least if it right away when it comes out, because I've got to play the first one and really figure out, is this a system that I like? I like the aesthetics of all the game components and everything, but I just haven't gotten to playing the game. So something on my mind for that eventually. Kind of going through here, they're talking about the tabletop simulator stuff. I do have tabletop simulator. I've just not used it enough to really think about playing a lot of the modules. If I'm going to play something digitally, Vassal is a little bit easier to handle these days. But in terms of the P500 editions, are things really worth taking a look at. They talk about a design that Chad Jensen was working on, and now Kai Jensen is working on. Chad had passed away, sadly, and had a game that was forthcoming, and they have it out here. Downfall, Conquest of the Third Reich, 1942-1945. If we open up the actual game page for it, looks like it's got a fair number of pre-orders already. The big thing for me to check was the game app, just to see like what kind of game are we talking about here, right? Um, well, it looks like it's a hex encounter game, right? The map actually reminds me a lot, just in terms of what it looks like and the aesthetic. It reminds me a lot of Axis Empires. Um, and it's really difficult to derive a lot of meaning from this in a vacuum. Um, it looks like there's a lot of these off-map boxes that represent certain things, but it's really hard to tell without the context, what we're really looking at. There are objective markers, and you can show who controls what objectives, I guess, over here. Battle of the Atlantic Track, which is kind of interesting. See, there's a lot of tracks, and it's like, what, can you make sense of it without the rules to really know what they're going for here? But just looking at the scale and the way things are situated here, it'll be interesting to see what this ends up looking like. I was thinking, oh, is this going to be an area movement? But it ended up being hex encounter. You can see, I mean, it is very specifically 42 to 45. So we're going to be talking about what's going on in Africa, eventually to the collapse of the Third Reich and all of that stuff. Right? Conquest of the Third Reich, downfall. Well, yeah, it's going to be a game that probably fits in the same sort of bucket as Fall of the Third Reich from Ted Racer, where the game will probably have a lot of focus on Germany being pushed back, right? If you see, like, the map ends not far beyond Stalingrad, and so maybe there's this possibility that the German player in 42 does a case blue and they're down in the Caucasus and everything else, but we'll see. We'll see. So there's potential here. Could be interesting. I just, until there's more, it's kind of hard to be sure of anything. You see, they got like fleets. It looks like it's going to be a block game. It's based on the way that what looks like stickers are designed. They look a lot like Triumph and Tragedy blocks or something. Also has a card element, which is kind of hit and miss sometimes. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting. It's not one that I'm immediately like, oh, I'm definitely going to pre-order this. I think that I want to wait and see kind of what we're dealing with. The other, which is probably a bit more of something I might want to pre-order, was the British Way Counterinsurgency at the End of Empire. And this is a coin package and it's already hit 523 pre-orders. It is a 4-in-1, so four separate games that cover sort of colonial conflicts related to the British Empire. So Kenya, Malaya, Cyprus, and Palestine. And you can see, if you just look at some of the maps, they're small in scale. So we're talking, I mean, smaller than Cuba Libre, which is the smallest coin game, or awfully close to Cuba Libre, if not smaller. And it'll have these 4 different games, and then it sounds like there's going to be a way to link them all together to kind of play through, the receding British Empire during decolonization and all of that kind of stuff. So it's a very intriguing idea. I like the coin games. I've sort of like, I'm not as passionate about them now as I used to be, but I still enjoy what the coin series does. And so this idea of having a 4-pack that you can play much smaller, quicker, coin games from within this box, but then also play them all together if you really want to. And each individual game having a much smaller footprint is a really interesting idea. I like the thought of that, and that it's all wrapped up in one cohesive theme. I think is very interesting. So I'm debating on pre-ordering this. I might pre-order it later as it gets closer to production. If it looks like all is well in the world with it. But if you see two double-sided mounted game boards, which means I guess you can't play all four at once. You have to play them in some sequential order, but four different game decks, and then all that stuff there. So definitely an interesting idea, and makes me wonder, will we see more of this in the future, right? Multi-packs or combo packs of different smaller games all in one package. I think that's very interesting. Now, there's stuff for The Last 100 Yards. I don't have that game. I can't speak much to it. I don't have Salerno 43, so a lot of that other stuff, not super interesting, just at a high level. But here is where I was like, oh man, like what are we dealing with here? Which was the hints for the future. And so, just looking at these, right? New Levy and Campaign series game, okay. That series seems to be vibrant, right? There's going to be more in the series, that's cool. This is the one that's really got me interested. A Napoleonic era game from Ted Racer. It feels like no matter what I do, like I play a lot of Ted Racer games, I simply cannot escape Ted. Everywhere I look is a Ted game. And I like Napoleonic era conflict simulation, right? I like Napoleonic Wars, all that kind of stuff. So a game designed by Ted in a Napoleonic era is just very interesting. Now, what isn't clear is what kind of game are we talking about? Are we talking about one specific campaign? Are we talking a big strategic level game that spans the era? Or are we just talking about a battle? Is this like a Waterloo campaign type of thing? Is this is this an Austerlitz game? No idea, right? All we know is it's Ted Racer, which means it could be Chit Pool. It might not be Chit Pool. I've seen no indication that this would be like a Dark Series game, right? I'm not sure how that would go, but it's very intriguing to me. So it's like, how soon will we get more information on this? I'm very interested, very curious what that could end up being. And speaking of Ted Racer stuff, I mean, we just finished up the Dark Summer. I have Case Yellow, like, on my shelf, maybe looking to play it. I think I could probably get it in and out pretty quickly. And I kind of consider Case Yellow an unofficial member of the Dark Series family. But what's interesting is, like, now that the Dark Summer has come out, obviously for Ted Racer games, like, a lot of people are asking, okay, what's the next Dark game? We want to know. Like, all these have been pretty good. What's the next one? And just to see, like, you can go to Board Game Geek and go to, like, one of either the Dark Summer or the Deadly Woods forum page. And there are some forum posts, some threads talking about it. There's a lot of possibilities. I think one possibility I saw was like a Korean War game in the Dark series. Now, that's hard for me to picture if I were to own all of that, because how many Korea War games do I have and need? Right now I have 3. Not all of them played, mind you, but I have 3 Korean War games. The Korea Fire and Ice, I've got the Korean War reprint, and I've got the Forgotten War in OCS. So it's like, well, how, what? It doesn't make sense to have another one at that point. But if it's a Dark Series game, maybe it gets called the Dark Peninsula or something. I'd have to play it, right? Like, I'd have to give it a try and see if the Dark Series does that conflict enough justice that it knocks another game off the shelf and I sell one or something, right? Like, I was kind of rationalizing to myself, like, okay, I could see a reason to keep Korea Fire and Ice and the Forgotten War and the Korean War reprint. Like I could maybe convince myself that I could keep all three of those games on my shelf for a reason. But if like there's a Dark Series game that comes out and it is also quite good, that might force a situation where there's going to be an odd man out that needs to be sold or given away or something. And so that's just kind of very interesting. And who knows what else could come down the way for the Dark Series. I mean, I think there's some conflicts that maybe wouldn't be as fun, like a 1945, Germany and Berlin. Like, I don't know why. I don't know if that would be very fun to do. Um, but there's just a lot of potential in the series. Any way you look at it. And while I'm on the topic of Korea Fire and Ice, I did notice that not too long after I completed my Korea Fire and Ice series, the OSS game series went on sale on Compass, and I know a fair number of people picked up copies of Korea Fire and Ice. So I don't know, if there's any sort of meaning behind the timing there or what. I suspect not, and you see patterns where none exist. But I hope that my series of videos are helpful to the people who bought that game, and that my unofficial errata document can further help them out in their endeavors to play that game. Anyway, so what else do we have here? They brought up a strategy game set in Afghanistan, which that can be anything, right? That could be contemporary Afghanistan. That could be 80s Soviet Union invading Afghanistan. Could be something ancient or 1800s Afghanistan. I mean, there's a lot that this could end up being. And if you say a strategy game, that would lead me to believe that's a fairly high level view of whatever conflict they're looking at. But who knows? Truly could be anything. So that's kind of interesting. And then a new bot package for one of our most popular coin games. They did the Truong pack for Fire in the Lake. So to me, this would be probably something in the same vein, maybe for the American Revolution one, Liberty or Death, or maybe A Distant Plain, which is the Afghanistan coin game. Or something else, so that's interesting to see. And then a new Operation World War II game from Mark Simonich, Simonich, I'm not sure the proper way to pronounce that actually. This could be anything, right? But I'm sure if you're familiar with Salerno, Ukraine 43, France 40, Stalingrad 42, you're probably excited to hear that. Now, I don't own any, or Normandy 44, or Ardennes 44. I mean, Mark has come out, has designed a lot of games in that system, and a lot of people really, really like it. And I have not dipped my toe in just because I have tended to be satisfied with like the Dark Series treatment of some of those same campaigns, for at least the ones that have come out that cover some of that stuff. Stalingrad 42 I have come very close to purchasing, but I am getting a different game that covers that campaign in much more excruciating detail, but I don't want to give it away yet. What that game is, we'll surprise you guys later when the time is right for me to talk about that. Not in this video, mind you, so stay tuned. But so all of this stuff. I mean, it's all kind of interesting. It's good stuff to look forward to as just a general thing, and then the rest of the stuff, production outlook, what to expect in the future. Not a whole lot of stuff that I was jumping on top of. I think the real thing that I'm kind of looking forward to, if I look at this, was Conquest and Consequence, which is sort of a companion to Triumph and Tragedy, which is a game I like. So getting that will be cool. And then I think there was like one more in here. Maybe that was it. That's really the only game I was interested in from this set. And then I think the real big deal is going to be the stuff going to printer in August. So the U.S. Civil War second printing. I am in for the update kit, which is kind of weird because I bought the first update kit for U.S. Civil War, and now there'll be a second update kit. But I'm going to get that. I think the U.S. Civil War is a very cool game. I've not covered it on the channel at all, other than to say I've played it and I like it, and I do like it. So I'm in for the second update kit. I don't know why it needs so many update kits. There's refinements being made of the game, which are all good as best as I can tell. But I'm looking forward to that. And then obviously Pacific War and Vietnam, the reprints of the classic games, I'm very much looking forward to. And then from there on out, there's just not as much that I'm currently really signed up for, at least not stuff that's going to be out for a while. Some of the stuff down here, Clash of Sovereigns, I'm interested in. China's War, I'm not sure yet how I feel about that. Musket and Pike Dual Pack, I am getting. Next War Supplement, I'm getting. So we'll look at some of this stuff in the future, but I'm not at the point where I'm like buying every single thing from GMT. You can see here's the back of the box for Pacific War, so you can read the blurb, see all this stuff. All looking pretty cool. Looking forward to that, and the rest of this stuff is all gravy. Now, before I move on to some stuff that Compass Games is mentioning, I recently I came across this sentiment somewhere that GMT isn't publishing war games anymore. Um, and I don't really know, like, if somebody's saying that, it has to be coming from either tremendous ignorance or uh, or being intentionally over exaggerating it or something, or just being facetious, which I think is foolish, very foolish. So I just to look at this, right? Like, okay, I'm looking at GMT games right now, and all I see is war game, 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 war game. Even if you're going to be like, no, coin games aren't war games, even though they are. But even if you're going to try to say that they're not, they're conflict simulations. Which, we're at the point where it's like, okay, if there's a real significant difference between a war game and a conflict simulation, somebody who likes war games probably likes a conflict simulation that isn't necessarily a war game. If you want to split hairs like that. Um, and if you just look at like recent released games like War Game, War Game, War Game, okay, you want to argue about whether or not Imperial Struggle is a war game, fine, war game. Uh, Update kit for a war game, war game, war game, technically a war game, war game. Well, I don't know. Okay, so Thunder Alley, Apocalypse Road is probably not a war game. I'll give you that. That's not a war game. My mistake. War game, war game. Not a war game. I guess that's a war game. Just one of these weird things. Like, I don't know where this thought process comes from, because if you look at the next, I mean, if we were just looking at that production schedule, if you looked at what games they currently have in the queue, like shipping now, okay, that's a supplement for a war game. That is a Euro. Okay, fair enough. War game, war game, war game. Euro, or whatever you want to call that. If it's not a Euro, whatever. Non-war game. Then war game, war game, war game. Now, the Wing Leader series, like, that's not really my thing. I'm not into that. Like, I had a copy of one of these games that I got for free via a draw prize at a convention, and I sold it just because it's just not as interesting to me. But I'm not going to deny that this is a war game. Like, it's certainly a war game to me. And then if you look at what's at the printer, okay, fair enough. A Euro, war game, history-themed family strategy game that is not technically a war game, fair enough. War game, Euro, war game, war game, war game expansion, war game expansion, war game expansion, war game, conflict simulation, non-war game, whatever you want to call it, war game, war game, war game, war game. I consider Twilight Struggle a war game, but somebody could argue that war game. Next category down, you get the picture, right? Like, I don't. It's such a bizarre thing to hear someone talk about GMT not publishing war games. Like, that's bizarre. Get out of here. My goodness. All right, Compass Games has some stuff going on. Their update tends to not be as like big, but there's a uh, Alma game coming in Paper Wars issue 98. I might not get that. I don't get every issue of Paper Wars, though I do have several from the last few years. They tend to be good, interesting games that come in the magazine. But they have some upcoming titles: Defending America, the Blue Water Navy restock, Enemy Action Ardennes, the War. I think we covered several of these in the last Monitor Side Chat video. But some of the stuff that they added Schnell boats, fast boats, a solitaire war game. They added the Troubles, which will be to me, it looks very coin-like. I don't know that you would say it's a coin game or not. It's kind of hard to me, it's kind of hard to peg it down as to what they actually are portraying here. But they describe it as a 1 to 6 player card-driven simulation covering the Troubles in Northern Ireland. So that could be a touchy subject for some folks, I'm sure. But we're in that space, right? So. They were putting out a Finnish expansion for Russia Besieged that will include some additional scenario stuff for just Russia Besieged without the Finnish stuff. And then not a whole lot different from what I covered last month. So, I will hand it to Compass. They are putting out good stuff. I mean, you can talk about some production issues for various games being what it is. I know that's frustrating. They're still putting out interesting stuff that I would like to play. And I've still not, there is a relationship between Blue Water Navy and South China Sea that I could not describe to you very well, how they are related or connected. But all three of these games, Blue Water Navy, South China Sea, Indian Ocean, are games that I find highly tempting. I just cannot justify it to myself to get right now. But they are very interesting looking games. I'll say that. Okay, so I think that's the roundup of the kind of the new publisher stuff, knowing we're like half an hour into the video. Some other stuff worth bringing up. There is this I really recommend it. It already has a fairly large number of reviews, but I feel the need to call it out just because I found it very, very interesting. Is this 2-hour panel discussion at a channel called Homo Ludens, which I'm not very familiar with, but they seem to be producing a heck of a lot of content, and the person who runs it is well connected because apparently he talks to Volko Ruhnke quite a lot on the channel. But this panel discussion with Mark Herman, Volko Ruhnke, and Jason Matthews about card-driven games. Now on the channel, I've not done a lot of coverage of card-driven games because they don't solitaire as well as they could, or as much as other types of games. But I really like card-driven games. I do. And they were really an entry point for me into the hobby, and they just have a lot of interesting potential. Maybe not every conflict should have a CDG covering it. Maybe some conflicts just aren't made for CDGs, but I think there's a tremendous amount of strength in the design methodology of card-driven games that allow you to play a lot of different conflicts with a lot of political type stuff factored in a way that just has a fun nature to it. You're drawing cards, and it's fun to see what you're getting and what you can do that is different from last turn because you have different set of cards. All that's very fun, and I think if you're skeptical about card-driven games or you already like them, I think this panel is just really good from all angles because it talks about the history of it. They talk about the way the system's evolved a little bit. I just really recommend it. It's worth a 2-hour listen. If you watch my videos, you're already spending a lot of time watching YouTube videos, I realize, but this was a very good panel. I really enjoyed listening to it and watching it, and I just want to make sure you guys have a chance to see it as well. I'm going to put the link in the description of this video when I get it up on the YouTube, and you guys can watch it. Like I said, I recommend it. Very, very cool to hear these guys' thoughts in the way that CDG, I guess, game type has influenced other things like, the coin system from Volko Ruhnke really kind of came out of card-driven games, that system as an influence and and another mutation onto it. Just very interesting discussion. So if you've not already watched this, I do recommend it. It's always interesting to hear Mark Herman talk about anything in games he's designed. Volko and Jason have a lot of interesting points to it. It's all a very enjoyable 2 hours for sure. So I recommend you guys take a look at that. So the next topic I wanted to talk to, which is really driven from my recent play experience with World in Flames. It's just a very high-level discussion about the different major powers and some of the challenges that I've faced in my game playing of World in Flames. So I am currently playing in an in-person game. We're all vaccinated and we've been safe and all of that, but I have been playing in an in-person World in Flames game, my local group, and I tell you, it's what's interesting about World in Flames when you're really trying to play it is that you kind of have a good sense of who you're playing with, like how good they ultimately are. And I'll say, while I've done tutorial videos for World in Flames, while I have been playing World in Flames for a couple of years now, on somewhat of a semi-regular basis, I'm still not. I'm like barely, maybe intermediate. I'm probably not even intermediary skill level. Like I can't imagine I'm above basic newbie. Other than I just know the rules pretty well. But in terms of applying them and playing well, I don't think I'm very good. And I think that's okay. I'm not embarrassed to say that. I'm not terribly good at World in Flames. But I like it. I like it a lot, and I like to play it. It's one of my favorite games. The crown jewel of my collection, probably. I'm very glad that I am in the World in Flames space. But what's interesting is, like in my current game, a good friend of mine is very fresh newbie skill level. Very fresh newbie skill level, just still learning the system. He is my partner. We are the allies against our friend who is playing the Axis, and the guy playing the Axis right now is probably, in terms of who I know in person, the best Whiff player I know. But granted, I don't know that many, but he is quite good as compared to the rest of us that I've been able to tell. He knows the rules well. He applies them well. He does think several steps ahead, and it is very hard to tangle with him. Whatever faction he's playing, he could be playing any faction, and he's doing reasonably well. He's played well as the Allies. He has played well as the Axis. And in our current game, I have been charged with controlling the Commonwealth, the British Commonwealth, and the United States. Now, as of now, we are just getting to 1941, so it's still pretty early in the game. The Axis is feeling the momentum of being on the offensive still. They have a lot going in their favor. Our Axis player is performing very, very well. And it just made me think about, like, however you play this game. If you're playing it solitaire, that's one thing. If you're playing with friends or people you know or whatever, you're probably not playing with the bidding system, which is something that is in the rules to, like, if you're playing the game competitively, how you determine a winner. So that the person playing Italy could be the winner because they held on to the most objective hexes above their bid. It's kind of complicated to describe. It would take me a long time in this video to fully flesh it out. Main thing is, if you're just playing with your buddies, you probably are not playing with bidding. Because you're just playing the game. You're just looking to have fun. You're playing the sides, right? You want the Allies to win, or you want the Axis to do well if you're playing on the Axis team or whatever. And so when you're not worried about bidding, you're really just trying to figure out, like, who can each player, what powers can they play and have it make sense and not be a total chore or a nightmare or whatever. And I mean, I think I'm just at the point where I can play the Commonwealth okay. And this is actually my first time in a non-solitaire context playing the Commonwealth. And I think that the thing about when you're playing World in Flames, and knowing that it is, it's a fairly complex game, there's a fair number of rules, there's a lot of different types of things that you need to be thinking about when you're playing. that, like, Russia, if not for the whole border rectification oddball stuff that can happen over here with Romania and Finland, if you sort of had someone holding your hand through that set of rules and political rules, I think that Russia is almost always the best faction for a new player. Because if you're playing, I think in most cases, however the number of players you have and the powers are distributed, if you're playing Russia, you're also playing China. Now, China is its own tarball, but ultimately, if you're just playing Russia and China, and you're a new player, the majority of the rules that you really care about, or that you're going to be expected to know, are the ground warfare rules and some of the air warfare rules. If you can do that, you can at least just play Russia. Now, what will be unfair, I guess, is when you have Barbarossa and the East Front really kick up, and if the German player is a very experienced player, they're probably going to rip the newbie to pieces and take Moscow and everything else, right? That is what could happen. But I think if you're playing a friendly game and you have a newbie, or you are a newbie, and you were going to be a single power to play, I think the Russia/China combo is going to be your best bet, right? You're just, everything that you care about is going to be like each other. If you lose a city, if you're crossing rivers, if you're doing ground combat, all of that, you're going to be focused on certain sets of the rules, and you can operate on that pretty well. If you get a little bit braver, and you get a little more experience, then you could maybe move on up to one of the Axis powers. I think if you played Russia a couple of times and you feel pretty confident in the way that works, then you could start talking about playing an Axis power. Now, the problem with playing an Axis power as a new player is that you don't really appreciate that you are on a very tight timeline of playing through and taking the objectives that you need to take. An experienced player is going to really know that and kind of know their benchmark in terms of timing. But a new player has this pressure to perform well and may get psyched out by it. Because if you're playing Germany, let's just say you're playing Germany, right? That's the only Axis power you're going to control. It's just Germany. The whole entire game is bouncing off of you. So if all the other people that you're playing are really good players or experienced players, they're basically going to be operating off of what you do. And if you're not going to do very well, or you make a bunch of mistakes, you may get more easily punished for it. It just depends on how friendly of a game you're playing. As the German player, you're having to deal with Poland, and then the Low Countries, and then France, and then figuring out where you're going to go. But if you're a new player, it's not so bad, because the majority of what Germany's going to do is land warfare. So if you've played Russia, you've dealt with land warfare. If you're now playing Germany, okay, Poland, what is that going to involve? Ground forces and air. You're going to invade the Low Countries in France. Ground forces and air, right? And then if you're a new player, I think you just totally ignore the possibility of Sea Lion. You just don't even bother thinking of it. I think you don't even bother worrying about Spain and closing the Med at Gibraltar that way. I think if you're new to the game and you're in the situation that you're playing Germany, I think you just go for the standard 41 Barbarossa stuff, right? And you play off the strengths that you've developed in the game of ground warfare and air. And the only other things that are added to your sort of rules weight and considerations are going to be making sure you don't completely abandon your conquest. You got to remember to have garrisons to keep partisans down. You have to get some flak if you're playing with divisions, I guess. Depending on what, I guess any of this stuff matters on how many optional roles you're playing with. But knowing that you're going to get strategic bombardment, you've got to defend over here. You've got to worry about that and factor that in, which is new. New stuff you didn't have to worry about as much as Russia. And then you begin to start caring about naval stuff. but only on your own terms, right? So, are you going to send out the Kriegsmarine? Well, circumstantial. If you want to do it, you can, and it's up to you what you do with it. You're probably going to want to send subs out, but fortunately, subs are not terribly complicated, and they're not hard to do, and they don't soak up that many actions for your activity limits if you do a combined or whatever. Um, and you're not going to do as much of it as you might. I mean, you'll do it, but it's not going to be like this huge set of actions that you really need to worry about. So, like, I think it does make sense to play Germany after playing Russia, where you start to factor in more of these game rules that might matter, and preying on the Commonwealth's convoys, which is has its own level of fun in trying to do that, right, and trying to catch somebody off guard, and that makes sense. I think but if the newbie's playing Germany, I think all the rest of the players in the game, if they're already experienced players, need to have some level of accommodation for that new player. Because if it's going to be Germany performs very poorly the entire game, then it might not be a very exciting World in Flames campaign. So you might, your buddies or you, if you're the experienced player, you might want to give the German player some tips or give them some advice, because you don't want to spend a year and a half playing a campaign that isn't very fun or is going very one-sided because the new player is just a new player and they're not performing optimally all the time. The next power up, I would think, is the Italy-Japan combo. I think in most cases, depending on the number of people you're playing with, like Italy and Japan are sometimes combined. Like a player is going to play both Italy and Japan. I think this is another bump up in complexity because both of these powers have both land and naval stuff to worry about, but it's all fairly localized. So as Italy, your ground stuff is going to be some combination of maybe southern France, Yugoslavia and Greece potentially, depending on how things pan out, and North Africa. But then in combination with that, you really care and you really need to learn the naval rules, more so than even the Germans, because the Italian Navy is expected to actually do stuff. You want to be doing sub stuff, if you can, in coordination with the German subs. You want to have air power. You want to be building naval bombers and escort fighters to try to hold or control the Mediterranean, and figuring out the little logic puzzle of all your supply comes out of the Italian coast and is either going to the Western Med or the Eastern Med, and where are you going to put your strength versus the Commonwealth. And you're fighting in North Africa against the British one way or the other. Now, if you do very well and you take over Egypt and you do a bunch of stuff, hey, that's great. But you're really locked in to some pretty common spaces here. So your ground combat is usually restricted within a fairly narrow band of stuff. And then, ultimately, your the rest of what you're really trying to deal with is the naval air aspect. And I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that you would learn as a new player, but there's so many, like just knowing that Cagliari here, this port, is super important for your subs, because you want to launch your subs from here rather than back here, because you could get a 4-range sub that could go 1, 2, 3, 4, and be in the Gulf of Guinea and be sinking convoys that are coming around the Horn of Africa, or around around South Africa. You could target these guys here, and the Commonwealth player might get caught off guard because they're thinking, oh, they've got to defend here, they've got to defend here, really need to defend here. So that's sort of like the next level of complexity. But the real trick is Japan, where Japan does have land combat in China, all at a different scale, because the hexes in the Pacific and Asia maps are worth 2 or whatever. But then you have all this complication with a huge amount of naval stuff. And the only thing that makes Japan easier is that they have a somewhat localized spread, right? Like you have Japan, and you care about the China Sea, the South China Sea. Depending on where you're at in the war, you start to care about more of these areas through here, but maybe not all at once. So you have some time to figure out where you're going to get to and what you're going to do. Um, and if you look at like, the craziness that is trying to get Malaya, capture Singapore, the Netherlands, East Indies, anything you're doing around the Bismarck Sea, all of this stuff gets kind of complicated in terms of what are you achieving in the impulses where Japan declares war. So there is a lot more complexity in what you're doing. You're not, you're focusing a lot on air, you're focused on naval air, you're focused on sea power, you're focused on carriers and how to use carriers the best way possible, and you're doing a ton of naval invasions, amphibious landings, that kind of stuff, where it's a lot more rules to know and know how to apply effectively. So Italy's not so bad in a vacuum, but if you're also playing Japan, it's really Japan whose complexity goes way up. The only benefit, I guess, is Japan, for at least the first couple of years of the war, isn't worried as much about all of this stuff down here, and you have time to think it through and plan it out before it happens. That is one thing that is at least a benefit for Japan. In the last time, in the campaign before my current one, I was Italy and Japan, and I found I liked playing Japan. Like, it was a lot more complex, but it was manageable. Like, it wasn't that much area of the map that I was spread across. I had this sort of ring of influence that I could maintain, and I kind of understood how to move stuff between these sea zones and islands where I could do what I needed to do, or felt like I could pursue the stuff that I wanted to pursue without it being too chaotic or complex that I didn't know how to operate. Then I think the next degree of complication comes in with the Commonwealth. France, I'll say, is only complicated because of the Vichy rules, but however you've decided to let France be played, either to the bidding, the correct quote-unquote way of designating who controls France or not, it's not terribly complicated in and of itself, except for the Vichy stuff, which can be weird. But the Commonwealth and the United States are probably the most complex powers to play. And I'm going to talk about the UK and the US together because they basically have the same profile of challenge, where, as the Commonwealth at least, you are dealing truly with a global empire of stuff to worry about. You need to worry about all the sea zones in the Americas map because Germany could get subs or convoy raiders out to the Caribbean, even, with some of their units, depending on what options you're playing with. So the Battle of the Atlantic truly is there in this game, where you really have to think about how you're going to continue to contest the Axis, whether that means protecting against a sea lion, or fighting in North Africa, fighting in the Med against the Italians, where you will have naval battles and different things going on here. All the while trying to protect your precarious convoys that are spanning the globe. You will have convoys running from, potentially like Malaya from Singapore and India and Australia, sending convoys through these sea zones, through the Red Sea and the Med, or around South Africa. And in either case, there's always danger to any of those. Obviously, there's danger in the Med, just generally. There is danger even around here, because I mentioned those Italian subs could potentially reach down here. And you still kind of have to fight. Like, you still have to deal with ground battles. You've got the BEF in France if you decide to put it there. If you don't, you're still probably fighting in North Africa. And then you have a lot of air and naval stuff to worry about constantly. You're trying to put your ships out to sea to protect your convoys against the subs. That's challenging. And there's this whole set of, like, how do you what's the best way to put units with your convoys in the zero box, while also having units in other boxes so that they can shift down in the return to base phase, so that you don't have guys unescorted in the zero box, but also getting units into the 4 box so that you have a good chance of catching the submarines when they're out at play trying to find your guys. And depending on how you have your convoys set up, you have very, very many different sea areas to try to cover. And you'll figure out kind of where the critical ones are. Typically, the Bay of Biscay and the Faroes Gap tend to be really important because that's the last node, the last link in the chain of convoys to get stuff to the Commonwealth for production. So obviously, the French could be operating over here. Not the French, I'm sorry. The Germans operating out of France could be operating even just right here and be very dangerous, either with their subs or whatever. And then it depends on if your German player is wanting to really fight you there, and he builds a lot of naval bombers. There are, in fact, German naval bombers that are going to be quite proficient at knocking out ships wherever they decide to focus their naval bombers. And the Germans do have some fighters that are able to get into like the 2 box, even in 1940, and basically make it so that it's harder to contest those naval bombers. And the way that all this stuff works is, if you have air power as the British, and you likely will, you could put out naval bombers, and those naval bombers might get really good at taking out subs. But if Germany is using naval bombers, your naval bombers won't fight the other naval bombers. You'll fly right past each other. So if the Germans aren't even using subs or surface vessels, and they put some of their naval bombers out here in like the 4 or 3 box of the Bay of Biscay, the only way to protect your unit, or to protect your convoys, is by putting a lot of escorts in the 0 box with them, and hope to achieve some decent level of anti-air value to ward off those planes, or you've bothered and prioritized, in reaction or in planning for the Germans to do this, you're building your longer range British fighters that can actually fly out to these and fly as an escort. So there truly is, and it's something I respect World in Flames very much for, like there is a battle of the Atlantic, there is a battle that is involved not just in your land-based air, but how do you can't neglect your land-based air coverage. Like if you, as the British, ignore building long-range fighters to actually come out into the sea zones, because you focus too much on just protecting your factories from some long-range bombing from the Germans or something, if you miss out on your ability to get fighters out here, you're leaving them, prey to being disrupted and being hurt. So you have to manage this all the time. If you lose convoys out far away, and gosh, if you lose convoys out here for one reason or the other, it might be really hard to send your reserve convoys from the United Kingdom. So you're like resource managing while fighting the war to like be building extra convoys to make sure that your supply lines are strong so that you can build units that will last you through the end of the game. You're sending surplus convoys to important places like South Africa or India, sending them over here so that if you lose convoys due to raiding, you can replace them locally, right? So you sort of have a dump of excess convoy points to use. And you're still fighting in North Africa, you're still fighting naval battles in the Med, and you're trying to build things that, whether it's amphibious landing craft or bombers or whatever, that will serve some purpose in the later part of the game when the Allies go back on the offensive in 43 or whenever that occurs. And so just me describing all of that, right? This should impress upon you the difficulty in playing the United Kingdom well. You could very easily, if you're not playing well, find that your convoys are disrupted. If you're not playing in a coherent manner of knowing you're going to take some losses, you need to cover those. You have to know how to actually, if you see the Germans are building naval bombers, you need to figure out do you have the long-range fighters to contest those guys, or even the short-range fighters? Are you going to do you have enough fighters to protect your convoys and also protect other stuff? And whether or not Germany's doing a sea line, that becomes a whole other factor here. So there's just so much more, I think, as the Commonwealth you have to think about at any given time in the game, and you have involvement on every part of the map. You care what's happening on the Americas map, you care what happens in the Europe map, and you care what happens in the Pacific and Asia maps all the time. And that can be tough. And that extends ultimately to the United States. And as the United States, you have to know very well the U.S. entry rules and make sure that you're playing them correctly and that you're playing them in a smart way. You have to then figure out how to leverage those U.S. entry things to benefit your buddies, and all the while you are trying to also build long term for what you think you're going to need in the late game. And that once you're actually in the game, you are concerned with the Battle of the Atlantic, if it's still going on. You are worried about these long convoys from America to the United Kingdom, to Europe, throughout the Pacific, right? Because then you're worried about, are you keeping your offensives alive because you're transporting supplies to these islands, depending on what supply rules you're playing with, the overseas limited supply or not. But you still have to worry about, all these things going on out here. And you can only imagine, right, as the U.S., you're trying to get into the Med, you're trying to get the Allies onto the continent. And to me, that's just a lot of complication and a lot of things you have to do in the right order. The thing with the U.S. maybe being offset by the fact that you have a lot of time to work with to make that stuff happen, but, you don't have as much time as you think in World in Flames. That's how it always feels like. You could say, oh, that's 2 years away in the game. Well, 2 years can still go by pretty quickly, and if you didn't take each turn and produce the right stuff or figured out the right way to produce the right things at the right time, you could be really screwed up and not be able to operate the way you need to operate to do well. So I guess what that leaves us with, right, or what's the point of this whole discussion? If you're interested in playing World in Flames and you're going to be playing with a group and you've never played before, you should ask, I think, to be Russia, and you should ask for assistance from your allied buddies on how to handle the border rectification stuff, the Baltic states, Romania, with the Bessarabia thing, and Finland, and get some advice. But then know that you don't have as much stuff to think about when you're playing as Russia. If you get a little more experience, then you can start looking at playing an Axis power. But I think it would be a hard thing to thrust the United Kingdom or the U.S. in a new player's hands, because I think a lot could get messed up and you might end up having a really weird game because they have so much that they need to know and execute on that is a little more complicated, that involves a lot of different variables. A new player may not be able to adapt to them as easily and could have a lot of problems. So I don't know. Just something to think about, and something that, because of my last game session, I had thought a lot about, because I had my German player really trying to mess with me in these sea zones with air power that I was not necessarily well equipped to handle, and I kind of got lucky and I managed to fend some stuff off, and now I'm in better shape than I was before. But it just made me think about that difference, right? If you're a newbie, what can you handle? If you're bold, hey, play any power. But if you're uncertain, I think Russia's the best place to start, and then sort of work your way west from there. And that will be your trend for getting experience with the game. Okay, well, that brings us to right about an hour's worth of video content. I think I've got some stuff already planned for the next video in August. I've got a long list of topics that could be talked about here in these chat videos. But ultimately, if this video gets too long, it gets really hard to enjoy. I realize that. So next month, when we look at the August updates, we'll from publishers and everything else, our monthly chat, What I'm going to focus on is talking about some frustrations in the hobby, but juxtaposed with some triumphs of the hobby. Because I had started thinking about different things, and it was a lot of like, here's stuff or nitpicky stuff that I'm frustrated about in the hobby, or whether it's like production issues with games or different things. But then it felt like such a downer because I was just talking about frustrating things. I said, well, why don't I talk about some triumphs as well, or really good things that we should be thankful for? And sort of had, here's a frustration, but here's a triumph. Here's a bad thing, here's a good thing. And I ended up creating a decent list in either category. So next time we'll grab a couple of those out of each category and we'll add them to the discussion and go from there. And so as I wrap up this video, if you stuck the whole way through, thanks for listening and watching. The next videos that I've got going on here, we'll be continuing to play through Pax Romana, at least the rest of the scenario that I've chosen to play. I might decide to do another scenario right after that, since I have the game out. They'll have to see where I'm at and how much I'm enjoying the game. I'm still really kind of learning the nuances of the game and what good play is supposed to look like. But I'm glad I was able to knock the game off my shelf of shame list with this playthrough series. I'm also looking at doing Korean War Designer Signature Edition, that reprint. My plan to do so was disrupted by finding that some of my tables are not all the same height, which I had not noticed before because I'd never tried to put them all together to play a big map game. So I am working to rectify that by getting some other tables, but I am waiting for those tables. So the Korean War is probably coming. I am debating on trying to play something else beforehand. Case Yellow is tempting. I am also looking at OCS stuff. I know last month I talked about OCS a little bit. I am reading the OCS rules slowly in the background, so it's not like I dropped the idea. OCS is for certain coming to the channel. I am just doing prep work beforehand. I've got some stuff planned that I think will be interesting, but there's some variables that haven't all been hammered out for that. So OCS is not at the front of the list. It is a longer-term planned thing so that when I actually do it, it will be the right level of cool for people watching. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm very invested in the series at this point and seeing it come out of the channel and seeing some cool stuff that I hope is entertaining for people. And there's still plenty of games that need to be played otherwise, right? Stuff on my shelf of shame list, stuff that I still have been meaning to get to, and we just haven't gotten there yet. But that's life, and you guys know how it goes. But plenty of more stuff to see in the future. I may not do random selection for a while. I think I've got a schedule of games bouncing around in my head to cover as we get going, as we progress. So we'll go from there. But thanks for watching, guys. As I had mentioned and wanting to get feedback from you guys, let me know in the comment section down below what games are you excited about that have not yet come out or have just been recently announced. If you're interested in World in Flames, what did you think of the commentary here? Have you taken the great leap? Have you been watching the Table's Edge tutorial videos? And what do you think of World in Flames? If you dipped your toes in it, I'm interested to hear that and all that stuff. If you're an experienced World in Flames player and you disagree with my assessment on what a new player progression might look like, let me know as well. I did all open discussion stuff, guys. I know this is not a stream. There's not as much direct interaction, but I am interested to hear from you guys and what you think, and we can go from there. So thanks for watching, guys. Hope your July has been entertaining and fun, and you're enjoying the summer if you live in the Northern Hemisphere. And we will see more and do more in the next Monitor Side Chat video in August. So hopefully you catch other videos until then, but if for some reason we don't we'll do more then. So thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Keep on gaming. See you later.